This week on Vatican Connections, Benedict XVI marked his 90th anniversary like a true Bavarian. A new shrine is opening in Assisi, and we go over the Triduum and Easter celebrations at the Vatican. Hello and welcome to Vatican Connections. I'm Emily Callan. Let's start this off again with the Pope's general audience. Following the Easter celebrations, Pope Francis continued his series on Christian hope, and more specifically on how the resurrection is at the heart of our Christian hope. He spoke to thousands of pilgrims who were gathered in St. Peter's Square, and here's a summary of his catechesis.
Dear brothers and sisters, in these joyful days of Easter, our continuing catechesis on Christian hope looks to the risen Jesus. St. Paul tells the Corinthians that Jesus himself is our hope. His resurrection is the event that grounds our faith. Without our confident belief in its historical reality, the Christian faith would be a mere human philosophy, and Jesus himself simply another great religious figure. Our belief is based on the testimony of those who encountered the risen Christ, from St. Peter and the group of the 12 to St. Paul, who was converted by his dramatic meeting with the Lord on the road to Damascus. Encountering Christ in faith is always a surprise. It is a grace given to those whose hearts are open. It overturns our comfortable existence and opens us to an unexpected future, sowing life and light in place of death and sorrow. This is the reason for our Easter joy. In the risen Jesus who dwells in our midst, we encounter the power of God's love, which triumphs over death and brings ever new life and undying hope.
Could President Donald Trump visit the Pope at the Vatican? Vatican official Archbishop Angelo Beccio said it's possible and it could be soon. Pope Francis is always willing to welcome heads of state who ask, he said. The U.S. president is scheduled to be in southern Italy at the end of May, and he will be participating in a summit gathering European and world leaders. White House spokesman Sean Spicer announced this week that they will be reaching out to the Vatican to see if a meeting or an audience with the Pope can be accommodated. We would be honored to have an audience with His Holiness. Every U.S. president since 1959 has met the Pope at the Vatican. And it's official. Pope Francis will canonize Francisco and Jacinta Marto in Fatima in May. This was confirmed on Wednesday during an ordinary public consistory at the Vatican. They will become the youngest non-martyrs of the Catholic Church. Francisco and Jacinta Marto, at the ages of 9 and 7, witnessed the apparitions of the Virgin Mary in Fatima on May 13th, 1913. Thus, Pope Francis will canonize them during his apostolic visit, marking the centenary of the Marian apparitions. The diocesan cause of beatification of Father Jacques Hamel has been officially opened. Archbishop Dominique Lebrun of Rouen made the announcement during their Chrism Mass last week. Pope Francis waived the 5-year waiting period normally required before a person can be considered for canonization. Last July, Father Hamel was killed while celebrating Mass in his church in Saint-Étienne-du-Rouvray. The Holy Father called Father Hamel a martyr during a Mass at the Vatican with a delegation from France. He said in his homily, "In this history, we arrive to our Father Jacques. He is a part of this chain of martyrs. The Christians who suffer today, be it in prison, in death, or by torture, for not denying Jesus Christ, show the cruelty of this persecution." The Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew I announced that he will be in Cairo with Pope Francis next week. Together, they will visit the Al-Azhar University, where an international conference on peace is being held that same weekend. Their presence there is a sign of unity and dialogue. But that isn't the only significant encounter to take place during his time in Cairo. Pope Francis, with the Ecumenical Patriarch and the head of the Orthodox Copts, Tawadros II, will meet with Sheikh Ahmed Al-Tayeb, the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar. Pope Benedict XVI celebrated his birthday on Monday, Bavarian style. The Pope Emeritus turned 90 on Easter Sunday, but following that day, in the gardens of his residence at the monastery Mater Ecclesia, he received his brother, Monsignor George Ratzinger, and about 50 people from Germany and Bavaria. Traditional Bavarian folk music was playing, and they served pretzels and even good Bavarian beer. He spoke briefly to his guests, saying, "It is beautiful in Bavaria because God knows and you know that He is the one who created the world and that this is good when we build it together with Him." He then added that there have been difficult trials and times, but He always guided me and pulled me out so that I could continue my journey. Did you know the Vatican has a cricket team? It was established in 2013 as St. Peter's Cricket Club. Team members are deacons, priests, and seminarians studying in Rome. It was sponsored by the Pontifical Council for Culture to encourage dialogue between faith communities. They are participating in an interfaith tournament hosted in Fatima this week called the Light of Faith Tour. Now we're almost at that part in the show where we talk about the Easter celebrations at the Vatican last weekend. But first, let's go to Assisi, where its old cathedral will now be known as a shrine. It's being named the Shrine of the Spoliation, and St. Francis of Assisi was baptized there. Built between the 11th and 12th centuries, the Church of St. Mary Major is located just outside the old city wall. The title of cathedral was moved to the Church of San Rufino, a title which still remains today. The inauguration of the new shrine will take place next May, presided by the Bishop of Assisi, Monsignor Domenico Sorrentino, and in anticipation of the event, Pope Francis wrote to the bishop, and Matteo Cioffi has more on his letter.
On the day of Easter, Pope Francis sent a letter to the Bishop of Assisi, Nocera Umbra, Gualdo Tadino, Domenico Sorrentino, offering his blessing and support for the decision to establish a shrine in memory of the spoliation of St. Francis on May 20th. The new Assisi shrine is born as a prophecy of a more just and supportive society, the Pontiff wrote, while it reminds the Church of her duty to live in the footsteps of Francis, despoiling herself of worldliness and clothing herself in the values of the Gospel. This choice was made by the Bishop at the end of the Holy Year of Mercy, but also in memory of the Holy Father's visit to Assisi in October 2013, not long after his election as Pope. For the Holy Father, having chosen Francis' name as an ideal inspiration of his pontificate, he said, the whole of spoliation made him relive with particular intensity the moment of the saint's life. On St. Francis, the Pope added that the saint made poverty the most evident sign of penance and renewal. Christ is the original model of spoliation. The spoliation is a mystery of love, the Holy Father said. It does not show contempt for the reality of the world. One must be stripped in essence, more than of things of oneself, putting egoism aside, which makes us defensive of our interests and our goods, impeding us from discovering the beauty of the other and the joy of opening our heart to Him. A genuine Christian path does not lead to sadness but to joy. In a world marked by so much individualistic sadness, the shrine of the spoliation intends to nourish in the Church and in the society evangelical, simple and supportive joy. In his letter, the Pope encourages pastors to share this message to young people, to have no fear in proposing a life lived for God. They, the Pope writes, must be accompanied in the light of these values. At the same time, adults are called to come together in unity of intention and sentiments so that the Church's character of family can emerge increasingly and the new generation feel themselves supported in their journey.
I told you last week that we would recap the Easter celebrations in Rome in this show. The celebrations were set against the backdrop of recent attacks in Egypt, the strikes in Syria, persecution, violence, and war. And each liturgy was an opportunity for the Holy Father and the faithful to pray for those who are suffering around the world. And remember that after the cross, there is the resurrection. So let's rewind then to Holy Thursday with the Chrism Mass celebrated at the Vatican that morning. Priests and deacons from all over the diocese gathered around the Bishop of Rome in St. Peter's Basilica for one of the most important liturgies in the Catholic tradition. Catholic News Service tells us why, and we hear from Pope Francis's homily.
Presiding over the first of two Holy Thursday liturgies, Pope Francis blessed the oils that will be used in the sacraments of baptism, confirmation, ordination, and the anointing of the sick. As Holy Thursday was the day Jesus shared his priesthood with the apostles, Pope Francis led the more than 1,500 priests, bishops, and cardinals in a renewal of their priestly vows, and he dedicated his homily to the importance of preaching with a joy that touches people's hearts.
Che nessuno cerchi di separare queste tre grazie del Vangelo, la sua verità non negoziabile, la sua misericordia incondizionata con tutti i peccatori e la sua gioia, intima e inclusiva. Verità, misericordia e gioia, tre insieme. Mai la verità del lieto annuncio potrà essere solo una verità astratta, di quelle che non si incarnano pienamente nella vita delle persone perché si sentono più comodi nella lettera stampata dei libri. Mai la misericordia del lieto annuncio potrà essere una falsa commiserazione che lascia il peccatore nella sua miseria perché non gli dà la mano per alzarsi in piedi e non lo accompagna a fare un passo avanti nel suo impegno. Mai potrà essere triste o neutro l'annuncio, perché è espressione di una gioia interamente personale, la gioia di un padre che non vuole che si perda nessuno dei suoi piccoli, la gioia di Gesù nel vedere che i poveri sono evangelizzati e che i piccoli vanno ad evangelizzare. Le gioie del Vangelo, uso adesso il plurale perché sono molte, diverse, a seconda di come lo Spirito vuole comunicare in ogni epoca, ad ogni persona, in ogni cultura particolare. Le gioie del Vangelo sono gioie speciali, vanno messe in otri nuovi, quelli di cui parla il Signore per esprimere la novità del suo messaggio.
Later in the day, the Pope was scheduled to celebrate the Holy Thursday Mass of the Lord's Supper at a prison 45 miles from Rome. The prison houses men and women who testified as witnesses for the state against associates or accomplices. He was scheduled to wash the feet of 12 inmates.
CNS mentioned in the video that the Chrism Mass was just one of two liturgies celebrated on Holy Thursday. The second took place at a prison in Rome. It's become Pope Francis's habit to celebrate the rite of the washing of the feet outside Vatican walls with the marginalized. This year, he went to Pagliano Prison, a facility hosting 70 inmates. He washed the feet of 12 men and women and gave an off-the-cuff homily.
Lui, che era il capo, che era Dio, lava i piedi ai suoi discepoli.
Good Friday. The Holy Father first presided the liturgy of the Passion of the Lord in St. Peter's Basilica. The service began with a silent procession, and once the Pope reached the main altar, he lay prostrate before it in prayer. The preacher of the papal household, Father Raniero Cantalamessa, gave the homily, which is the custom on Good Friday. Here is a review of his homily. Today, the news is filled with stories of violence and death. So why then recall the death of a man who lived 2,000 years ago? Father Cantalamessa asked this question at the beginning of his homily. Because that news story gives meaning to death. So he went on to explain how Jesus announced the resurrection of the body before his own death. After the sacrifice of Christ, more intense than the heart of darkness, a heart of light beats in the world. God intended to make Jesus the heart of the world. This explains the unshakable Christian optimism, explained the papal preacher. He described the coat of arms used by the Carthusian monks, a cross standing firm atop a globe of the earth. That image represents the definitive no of God to violence, injustice, hate, lies, to all that we call evil. It is equally the irreversible yes to love, truth, and goodness. He added, no to sin, yes to the sinner. Making that distinction is important because the sinner is loved by God, while the sin is a spurious reality that is added on, he said. So the cross is not against the world, but for it. And recall the passage from John's Gospel. God sent the Son into the world, not to condemn the world, but that the world might be saved through him. The cross is fixed, but the world is turning. We are living in a liquid society, Cantalamessa suggested, where there are no more fixed points or undisputed values. There are philosophers who offer tragic descriptions of what killing God has done and is doing in our time. But despite them, there is hope. The papal preacher said, "This is what the liturgy for Good Friday tells us. Christ did not come to explain things, but to change human beings, to change hearts." Pope Francis did offer a prayer after the meditation of the Way of the Cross at Rome's Colosseum. He called upon the faithful to take action against the destruction we see in the world, and that has become a part of ordinary life. Here's a clip of his meditation from CNS.
O Cristo, ti chiediamo di insegnarci a non vergognarci mai della tua croce, a non strumentalizzarla, ma di onorarla e di adorarla, perché con essa tu ci hai manifestato la mostruosità dei nostri peccati, la grandezza del tuo amore, l'ingiustizia dei nostri giudizi e la potenza della tua misericordia.
Another high point of the Easter liturgies is the vigil on Saturday, recalling the crucial moments in the history of salvation. After lighting the Paschal candle, the procession began in a darkened church with only candles to light the way, with the singing of the Exultet. During the celebration, the Holy Father also baptized 11 catechumens. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. The Pope imagined the scene. The women must have looked weary, asking themselves, can love have truly died? These women remained steadfast until the last moment of Jesus' life. Here we find them at the tomb, their faces a reminder of the faces we find in our world today. The Holy Father mentioned all those facing injustice and brutality, poverty, pain, loneliness, exploitation, and who are found in the streets of our cities. He called it human dignity crucified. Although we carry with us a promise of the certainty of God's faithfulness, he said, we also bear the marks of wounds, of infidelity, of battles lost. And almost without noticing it, we can grow accustomed to living with the tomb, living with frustration, or convince ourselves that this is the law of life. But that hope was reawakened on Easter morning, when the women heard a voice say to them, "Do not be afraid, he has been raised as he said." The resurrection is transformative. Jesus wants to break down all the walls that isolate us and our compulsive need for security, so he can offer new possibilities. The resurrection is what made the women go in haste to tell the news to others. He concluded with this exhortation, "Like the two women, we have visited the tomb. I ask you to go back with them to the city. Let us retrace our steps and change the look on our faces. May we allow the beating of his heart to quicken our faintness of heart." And finally, on Sunday, truly a day of joy and celebration, pilgrims gathered in a decorated St. Peter's Square for Mass and to hear the Pope's traditional Urbi et Orbi benediction. During the Mass, he gave an improvised homily and at the end of the celebration made his way to the central loggia to address the crowds. "In every age, the risen shepherd tirelessly seeks us," the Pope exclaimed. And he does so again in this age. He goes out to the lost, the marginalized, the lonely, victims of all kinds of exploitation, discrimination, and addiction, oppressed by violence, famine, and regimes. And he does this through the hands and feet of men and women of mercy. May the risen Lord guide the steps of all those who work for justice and peace, the Holy Father prayed. May he also grant leaders of nations the courage they need to prevent the spread of conflict. He prayed especially that relief be given to the civil population in Syria, that peace comes to the Middle East, starting in the Holy Land, Iraq, and Yemen. He also prayed for people of South Sudan and Sudan, Somalia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and other parts of Africa. For Latin America, marked by political and social tensions, for Ukraine, still beset by conflict and bloodshed, and finally for the whole European continent, in particular, that young people may find employment. May Jesus, who vanquished the darkness of sin and death, grant peace to our days, he concluded. He then imparted his apostolic blessing. True, St. Peter's Square is always beautifully decorated for Easter celebrations. Elaborate floral arrangements give it color and life. This year, once again, the flowers came from Holland. Dutch florists and growers have been responsible for the floral display designed for the Easter celebrations at the Vatican for nearly 30 years. Within only 2 days, Dutch flower growers arranged 35,000 bulbs, tulips, roses, lilies, green plants, and trees. The display needs to be ready by Sunday morning. But this takes months of preparation. All of the flowers are grown in Holland and then transported to Rome. So what happens to the flowers once the celebrations are over? They're relocated to the Vatican Gardens. And that's all for our show this week. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to send them via Vatican Connections Twitter page at Vatican Connections. I'll be happy to answer them on our next episode. And if you are new to the show or a returning viewer, we at Salt and Light value your feedback on the content we produce. If you would like to tell us how we are doing, please visit saltandlighttv.org/VC survey to send your comments directly to our programming team. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next week.